Good morning. Morning. You know what? Lots of major events, everything gets planned, everything needs approvals, right? And if we don't quite get that, nothing gets started. I remember Chris, where are you, Chris? Early in the 2000s, maybe 2001, 2002, he came to Singapore and he said, hey, Phil, we need to have an event. I want to have an event, a cycling event. And I was with a government agency then. And it was real funny because when I saw his application, I said to him, what? You want to have an event on our roads? Are you crazy? It ain't going to happen. But then again, that's how the mindset was back then, you know. And we quickly realized that without proper approvals, nothing gets started. And I think that applies across the regions in any country, even though your operating environments are different. So fast track it today, I think approvals are still very important. You still need them. And earlier on, we heard a comment, right? If you don't have a proper approval, accidents may happen, safety may be compromised, or when you have a proper approval, you get volunteers more than you expect them to be. So I just want to start off with a general question, you know. What have we still come to expect in terms of approvals from governments, in terms of approvals from authorities? Maybe, taking, I'll sort of pose that to you first.
Well, obviously, I can't speak on behalf of governments. I can only speak on behalf of the Singapore government, and even then, probably I can only speak on behalf of Sport Singapore, and not all
that's a good start.
And not all my fellow public agencies. But I think one of the big things around engaging governments is to help governments get to know you better. And for you to be able to put yourself in the shoes of the agencies that you are engaging, to help them understand why you are actually adding to their value proposition. When you're out there pioneering a major event in Singapore and trying to get people who have never seen what you see to be the possibilities and the potential for the value that you're trying to create, obviously, it's going to be a bit of an uphill journey because you're contending with mindsets that have been sort of set through years of bureaucracy. So in Singapore, we've sort of set ourselves up to have championing agencies in various spheres of activity, and for major events, sporting events in particular, it is obviously Sport Singapore and the Singapore Tourism Board that are spearheading this. And I think over the years, we've seen a certain growth in events because mindsets have indeed shifted. But it remains a continuing challenge to help different agencies understand the value that we're bringing to the table. So one of the big things in Singapore, particularly since we're dealing with running events, is the issue of road closures and disruption to traffic in the cities. And if the Land Transport Authority and the various authorities responsible for road closures were to only look at what it has to do with disrupting traffic flow in the city, disrupting stakeholder operations, business operations in the city, and if that's the only lens that they use to your event, it continues to be an uphill battle. But we know that there's an active mobility agenda in Singapore. We know that there's an agenda to go car light in the future. Yes. We know that there are many different strands of effort that need to take place to enable that to happen, and events have a role to play in that particular regard. So how do we help people see things from a different set of lenses?
Yeah. I think it's important that we also bring to the agencies that it's just not about their little scope of work. Like, for example, the traffic folks, they're interested in law and order, safety on the road. But if it's just about looking at that itself and forgetting the bigger picture, I think it's very, very difficult for events to take off. And once you start engaging them at the lower working level, I think you're going to have a lot of problems because it's very easy for an officer to receive an application and says, oh, well, it's always too much work for them. It's more work. I've got so many events coming up. This is another one. I'll just leave it aside first. And time is time is essence to everybody, and I think this is something that we really got to look deep into. Maybe Dave, you have you run events, and what's your take on this?
Thank you, Patrick. I think first of all, I'll mix my metaphors. Governments are not the golden goose. Mm-hmm. If you go to them expecting to underwrite your event, to deliver your event for you, then you're wasting your time. Secondly, if you do get that support, don't be an Oliver Twist. Please, sir, can I have some more? Because once you've gone through the process, they're giving you all they probably can. You've done the right things. Secondly, I would say it's 3 Ds. Do a dance. You will have to go through a process, good or bad, across the region. Be prepared to be disappointed. Mm-hmm. Be prepared to move on when things don't come how you wanted them to come. But also be prepared to be delighted. Government organizations, agencies, whether it's traffic police or whether it's actually a sports council, they can actually give you a lot more than you were even dreaming of, mm-hmm. if you really know how to ask the right things and sell your story correctly. But the key to it is do it early, do it fairly, do it correctly, but never ever expect them to basically come in and save the day for you, because with Spartan Race particularly, we are a commercial organization. We are a private sports event. We are not part of any sports association. We are not part of any Olympic movement. We're not part of a bigger, I suppose, athletic world. Mm-hmm. So why would they support me? Why would you come in and support me? Or do I fit any of your agendas, really? So don't expect too much, but be delighted when you get more than you were asking for.
Dave, your take. Sorry, Paul.
I can be.
Yeah, actually mirroring Dave's comments. I mean, sponsorship isn't free money, and I think a lot of rights holders approach government departments as if it is free money, as if it's a charitable donation, mm-hmm. and they wouldn't dream of approaching the private sector in that way. And government departments, particularly in the developing countries in the region, they're getting more sophisticated. They want to know what their returns are, whether it's an investment or an objective. But it's sometimes very, very difficult to know which department to approach. Mm-hmm. There isn't really often a central department to go to that will direct you to the different agencies. And I think that's a big challenge for certainly international rights holders going into a new market. But they are out there. I mean, the departments are very focused on supporting events. Mm-hmm. But don't forget, as we've seen the growth of mass events in the region, and you're not alone. I mean, there are lots of other events in sport and non-sport out there, all vying for the same money, whether it's from government or private sector. So I think you have to have a compelling story when selling to whoever you're selling to. In our experience, we found the best way to work with government departments, specifically in Thailand, is to work as partners. So actually, we're not there with a hand out asking for a gift. We're not there really selling sponsorship rights. We're there saying, look, we want to bring this event to Thailand, and this is why we want to bring it there. And actually, it might be that you have to work with multiple government departments. We have our friends from TCEP in the room today. But, on some events, we work with the Sports Authority, the Tourism Authority, and the Thailand Convention Exhibition Bureau together, because they all bring different parts to the organization.
We do have experienced brand holders. There could be someone new into the market. What are some of the pitfalls you have experienced when it comes to inadequate preparations or inadequate lead time in terms of engagements with the regulators? And you have things like, for example, if you're looking for funding, they may have budget constraints budget planning cycles to worry about. How are these things important to an event organizer in making sure that the event actually is able to kickstart smoothly?
Well, I think, but local knowledge is very, very important. In Thailand, for example, the government budgets run 1st of October to 30th of September every year. So it's kind of a no-brainer that you need to go in and pitch your proposition before the 1st of October when their budgets are released. if I got $1 for every time an event came to me and said, oh, we have this great event, can you help with commercial sponsorship? Can you help with government liaison? Yep, of course we can. When is your event? Oh, it's in 3 weeks' time. Well, of course you can't. I mean, nobody can. So I think, you have to have local knowledge. You have to know who to ask for support from and when to ask them. And more importantly, how to ask them.
Tell us a bit more about how to ask them. That sounds interesting.
Well, I mean, simple things in terms of what language to ask them. The majority of organizations respond and act in English, but in Thailand, we always write in local language. We always write requests in local language. We always write to the most senior person, allow them to delegate down and assign to the correct departments. And that's all done very formally. But actually, the irony is once the formal part is done, the follow-up is quite often done by line or WhatsApp or by WeChat. And you might be sitting back waiting for a formal response to a letter for 8-12 weeks, or forever for a response to an email. But you get an instant response from a line message to the governor of the Sports Authority of Thailand or the governor of the Tourism Authority of Thailand. So it's kind of knowing how to communicate with the specific department you're working with.
So you talk about understanding the local knowledge, the local way of approaching. You do have instances where things are more structured, they're more formalized. I would say, for example, turning back to the example of in Singapore, I mean, to organize an event, to organize a road-related event, for example, the traffic police would have a wonderful, you could go visit their website, they've got a wonderful code of practice where everything is spelled out for you, You don't really have to be wondering how to go about applying. I'm just thinking, whether would this be something useful in other regions where perhaps other than relying on contacts, local knowledge, you have a structure in which you can let people apply, let organizers apply, and that makes the application process a lot simpler. What are some views on that? Dave? Take in?
I think every country, every city is different. There are different considerations, there are different things that are preoccupying the minds of different agencies in the day, and as I said, I can only speak for Singapore. I think the good thing that's happening in Singapore right now is that the number of events have been steadily rising, and I think people start to realize the benefit that this has on the community and city as a whole. And what's happening right now is that all the agencies are starting to get together, and we're looking at particular verticals and looking at horizontals. When I say verticals, we can be looking at a specific process related to the application of a temporary occupation license, which you need if you want to use a particular event space. And yesterday I was at a meeting, a rather large meeting with all the different agencies there, and the Singapore Land Authority says, we're going to streamline this, and we're going to provide a whole of government business service to all the different agencies to process this in a standardized way. But at the same time, we're looking at the horizontals across all the different agency approvals to say, what is archaic, what needs to be gotten rid of, what it is that we can streamline even further and reduce the time taken for it, and how do we build the sort of connections and relationships with industry so that we know our partners, we know what they're about, we trust each other, and there's a very clear shared vision about what we want to do.
So we see that government can be taking the lead in this. What about industry and so? What kind of advice can they offer to the governments? I mean, many practitioners over here. What are some of the things that you want the governments to hear in order to make things easier in terms of the application process?
I mean, from our point of view, your idea of having process, forms, systems, streamlined systems is great, but it can be impersonal. And ultimately, I mean, for a Spartan race is not a mass race. I'm not talking 40, 50,000 people. We're talking 8,000 or 9,000 people. And we as an organization try to connect with as many of those people as possible. So process is one thing, and it's great to be able to fill in the forms, and it does make things easy. But if you can't partner with somebody from that organization, from that agency, if you can't actually have a champion within that organization, who is maybe going that extra mile for you because they see the value of you beyond just a form, a fee, and such like, then, well, you're not going to make a success of your event, and you're not going to deliver to your customer. You're not going to deliver to your racer. We are all about trying to improve that relationship. When people come back from a Spartan race, they're pretty destroyed. And so we heard earlier about what you do in your festival and things like that. A lot of that is, well, how do they get home from the race comfortably, easily? Buses, shuttles, trains, and such like. They're dirty, they're messy, they're wet, they're cold, they're literally falling apart. Making that journey home is as much as important as how they got there. And so that's partly, obviously, when we're dealing with an agency, is not, thank you very much, you've signed off on it, we're going to fill this space. And then at 6 o'clock in the evening, that's it. We've stopped worrying about them. It's beyond that. And so that is obviously sometimes getting someone from a park authority or someone from a transport authority to say, why don't you do this? Why don't you try this? There's shuttle buses, there's this, there's that. What can we do with the MRT? What can we do with ferries? Yeah, that can make that experience better for you. That's why I say, as an event company, when we first launched in Malaysia, even though I'd spent 7 years in Malaysia prior to that, we learned from the agencies. Because to be honest, they've been running events from that point of view, from an approval point of view, long before we were. So you've got to ask, what can you do for me, rather than, I just want this. Yeah, right. This is what I want from you. And certainly, if that has a dollar figure to it, that's not the best way to open up the conversation. Because government agencies, government-linked companies can often give you far more than that you never knew about.
Brings me to one other point. You know, in getting things organized, in moving things quickly, and in seeking approvals, you do come across, at times, I mean, probably, thankfully not often, but there are times where there could be too much red tape perhaps, or too much rules, too much impediments, and somewhere along the line, someone down the food chain says, hey, you know what, why don't you help me out? I'll help you speed things up a little, you know? The issue of integrity in this whole process. I think that's very important. The organizers themselves are bringing in something good to the forefront, and how do we deal with such a situation if it does crop up? Maybe
the question I really didn't want to answer. It comes back to partnership, and it comes back to who to approach. So in our experience, we approach the most senior person in an organization. They assign it to the department or the person they want to organize it. So you're in a real partnership. And then we work together, so we're co-owners of the event. I'll give you an example. We spoke about it yesterday evening. Spear Asia, just a couple of weeks ago, there's the Asia Sports Industry Awards and Conference that happened in Bangkok for the third year in a row. 4 years ago, the rights holder came to me. They were holding it in the Philippines. They wanted to move it. And we took it on commercially. We sold to the commercial sector, but we also engaged with government. And we sat down with the Sports Authority of Thailand, and we explained what it is we were trying to do. And we were very fortunate that the Lieutenant Colonel Rutt, the Deputy Governor of Professional Sports and Benefits within the organisation, was looking for a way to educate the 80 or so national sports associations to show them what their peers are doing in other parts of the world. 3 years later, we're sat in a meeting, and there's a new minister, there's a new governor, and I'm sat there thinking, okay, this year could be tough. This year we might not get the support that we've enjoyed for the last 2 years. If we don't get it, what are we going to do? Who else are we going to work with, etc. And Colonel Rutt sat there, and he said, right, let's discuss our event. And this was fantastic to hear, because he really felt that the Sports Authority and MMC in the UAE, it was their joint event. Clearly it wasn't. I mean, the commercial rights are with the rights holder, but he felt that way. And he would do anything as our champion to make sure the process works smoothly. So the smoothing of the role came from him feeling ownership, not from some self-motivation.
And very often we're looking in terms of organizers coming in for the long run, not for just a one-time event. I guess it would probably be fair to say that should something involves integrity that comes along, that challenges you, that affects the company's core values, for example, should one just say yes will help out, or no, we're not going to do it. We're going to bring it up to the higher authority. How does one deal with that?
Well, first of all, there should be no tolerance to it, because ultimately most of us are building international brands. Very often those brands are races and events that fall under international governing bodies who have their own, obviously, code of ethics. You just cannot really ever allow it in. And if it's a question of, well, maybe we just don't do this event, or we don't do it here, or we don't do it this year, then that is something you have to consider, which is why start the process early, so you start to find these obstacles early.
Yes.
Secondly, yes, it's like heli skiing. If you're going to have the most fun, just go straight to the top of the mountain and work down rather than trying to work your way up the mountain, because you will find more and more obstacles on the way up than you will on the way down. But I think the part of it is, we all know in certain parts and certain locations, for instance, we do a lot of races where we're going from small kampong villages, we're going through private land. You may help locals. You may have a situation where you're coming up against people who are like, why are you running through my land? Why are you doing this? Now that is something that perhaps a government authority can't actually deal with. You deal with that locally. How we try to do it is by engaging people to work with us. When we build a Spartan race, when we build an obstacle course race, we're there for 15, 20 days building the obstacle course. So we can work with a local village, we can work with whatever it is there that was required. We give back, effectively.
So you create understanding, explain to them what value they can bring to you. Yes.
Can I just add to that point, really, about how important that actually is? Because it's not just what your company does or what your property does that impacts the way governments view it or the way communities view it, but what other people in the industry are doing as well. And there are numerous examples where people who have come in, not very credible, not very capable, have created negative impacts on communities, and that has a longer tail as far as a credible company coming in now to say that I want to do something in the same space. Right? So the industry as a whole too needs to find a way to be able to sort of recognize who are the trustworthy players within that space, and to recognize that fairly quickly and find a way that we can sort of, I wouldn't say regulate, but maybe self-regulate who actually is coming in that space. We've had applications from Sports Singapore, for example, for at least 4 marathons to be run in Singapore. And we have to look very carefully at who this is that's presenting that proposition. We've had all kind of races that we do not fund, that don't come to us for funding, don't come to us for endorsement, and go direct to the authorities, get approval, and create a mess. And subsequently it creates a more of a hurdle for other credible companies to come in. So there needs to be a mechanism by which there is some level of self-regulation.
Okay, let's move this on a bit. In terms of funding, you know, a lot of it would perhaps dependent on government funding or sponsorship. You know, I was just wondering, can funding in the traditional sense be pushed forward a little? Can we have something different in terms of funding, like you know, where we get corporations to take part to do some good, and not expect the authority or the government to be the source of the funding? Some thoughts about that. Go on.
Go on.
Okay. I mean, I think it exists. I think you know that there's lots of different tiers of sponsorship or partnerships. You know, some people make monetary investments, some people make VIK, value in kind investments, and I think within VIK it can be goods and services, but it can also be human resource as well. So I think it does exist. In terms of government, I think it also exists. I mean, you know, it may be that you don't necessarily need the financial support of a government department, but you really need their endorsement and moral support to move things along, to deal with maybe provincial government or local government. So I think it's already there, and I think that actually it's probably here in this region more than in Europe or North America, where VIK it tends to be the preferred choice for lots of private sector and government agencies. But of course, cash is king, so everybody's looking for money.
Money.
Well,
All right, Dave.
I was going to say that the cash is king, but there's only one king, and we're all going after the same one, so it's a little bit difficult for us all to have it. In Spartan Race, we were very fortunate in Malaysia when we launched, where we didn't go asking for cash, we asked for support when the sponsorship came. And it came in a very unusual way for us, is that we were invited by the sports ministry to participate in a roadshow that they were already running, all the states across Malaysia, where they invited us to come and showcase our event. Immediately we got a platform to market, which we would otherwise have probably had to pay for ourselves. We would have launched a roadshow, we would have gone out on the road to each different state to tell the story. We became part of something they were doing, something where they were delivering 10, 15,000 people, sometimes over a weekend, to an event, purely driven, similar with the Active SG program, to get people moving. We were part of it. In some states, we became almost a sort of like the showcase of it, because everyone was like, oh, Spartan, what's that? Obstacle course racing, what's that? It still cost us, but to our bottom line, we saved a lot of money. We got that support. It was an immediate invite to be part of something. They won because we brought something new to their roadshow. We brought something exciting and different. We won because simply we would have had to have done this anyway, and it would have been all on our own cost.
A sort of a collaboration then.
Exactly.
Yes.
So I just wanted to add to that to say that increasingly, from a Sports Singapore point of view, we're starting to take more and more of a co-investment approach. In other words, not just to sit back and wait for you to come to us to say that, we would like to get some level of funding support or facilitation, but if we look at the entire portfolio of what exists in Singapore and the segments that we want to reach and some of the impacts we want to have across a range of whole of government agendas, we do want to take a co-investment approach with you to say, well, we think your property can deliver X, Y, Z, and we would like to come in with some funding if you would help us achieve some of these things that we want to do. And I think that approach probably augurs well for what's coming in the years ahead.
Yes. What about the roles of corporations? I mean, they're not in the form of sponsors, but how can large corporations be approached to contribute in a way? I think volunteers would be something useful. Some organizations have got some pretty highly skilled people. Their core values could be, for example, safety and innovation and stuff like that. What roles can they play in terms of providing needed manpower for a big event?
Personally, from our point of view, it's key. Volunteers for an obstacle course race are not just water stations. They're not just human pylons pointing this direction. We need people who are safety-minded. But finding volunteers, as we've all discovered, is very, very, very hard to do. And then keeping them on message for 12 hours or more throughout the day is difficult. If you engage with an organization like Keppel, for instance, or Felder in Malaysia, where their staff are trained, experienced, mature, that they can still come there as a sponsor wearing branded. So, 3 kilometers of a race that's got marshaled by a brand, it goes straight to my bottom line, because we don't obviously have volunteers in this part of the world, as I think a lot of places have, where they are purely volunteers. We pay for volunteers, I think, across the board. But a corporation that can come and give me 200 or 300 people to act as a volunteer to get their marketing message across, use the event particularly as a sort of a team building, as an experience. Anyone who watches races, whether it's a marathon or an obstacle course race or a cycle race, and becomes engaged in something bigger, sees the emotion, sees the joy of people participating and the fun of it, that is actually a great takeaway when you go home at the end of the day, is I've given back in my own sort of way. If staff feel, I'm being forced to do this by my company, I guess that is an issue, but then the company itself can incentivize their staff to become involved. But I feel that they come away from that with a greater experience, possibly a greater learning, and we come away with having the appropriately skilled people in a position.
To them, it's like I can apply my skills away from the work area in a public event that's generating good. Tekin, what do you think about that? Is that something that we're increasingly encouraging, or?
We're certainly encouraging it from all angles. I think there's a big movement in Singapore right now called Giving SG. Mm-hmm. Yes, it's about something similar to B1G1, but beyond that, it's also giving of your time. And the richer the portfolio, the more opportunities for people to come in different ways.
Right.
There's no one size fits all, and we are indeed seeing how people are coming in. We do an annual event called Get Active Singapore. There's an inclusive sports festival as part of that, and we do see companies coming in with their volunteers because they want their staff to be able to engage and understand this whole message of inclusiveness.
And I guess, like you mentioned earlier on, I mean, in our discussion just now, is that a fit society can benefit both those who are participating as well as people who are even volunteering. Companies themselves can use such an event to generate a sense of healthy living, healthy employees among their own workforce. Paul, what's your take on this?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I think we see a lot of private sector companies utilizing certainly mass events to engage with their staff, to engage with their own workforce, and to engage with their customers as well. So a lot of team building, a lot of participation within those events. In terms of volunteering, it's not really our remit, but I think the struggle is the quality of volunteers out there. And also the length of work time here, in the region, where people perhaps aren't working a 5-day week, they're working a 6-day week, so they don't really have the time to volunteer in their own time. So it needs to be within the work time.
I think it's important also for these volunteers to actually really be volunteers, not being volunteered to be on duty, because you see some of them, they're not too interested about it. They're always looking at a watch, What time will it be over? And but I think by giving the right message across to them, giving them the right value sets, I mean, that's just, especially younger volunteers, that's setting them right, giving them the right footing in the right direction towards something even greater.
I think in this particular context of this discussion, of course, is in Singapore and Malaysia in particular, you're working with a lot of GLCs. You are working with companies who are effectively agencies. And they perhaps have more reason and more power to actually give back to you in that way than they can necessarily with pure cash sponsorship. Commercial organizations, I guess, in many ways they see a sponsorship as a day out for a lot of their executives, maybe a lot of their staff. You're giving them race tickets and such like. They themselves don't see the team building, the corporate benefit of being involved. But maybe they should. Maybe that's actually a way to start educating them, is that this event is more than just a VIP tent, that they actually get involved, because that really comes down to a partnership. If you are partnering with a sponsor, then they are more involved with your event, and they've really got to get more out of it than just literally the hospitality and the branding. Okay,
just probably a last point. You've got such a great talent pool over here. Lots of people have their own niche area expertise and all. I was just thinking, this one maybe for Chris. Where are you again, Chris? For MPA, probably at your next edition, what about coming out with a sort of a best practice guide for organizers of major events? We talk about evolving, doing things together, putting together an industry practice guide. I mean, different countries have got different rules, but a general set of practices, best practices. Would that be something that such a conference would be able to put up? Some ideas on this?
I mean, I think it's a great idea, but in reality, very difficult. I think there's so many differences between the region, and if you look at the developing countries in this part of the world, they operate very, very differently. And even within a country, you may have 3 or 4 government departments that are relevant to the event that don't speak with one another. Sport tourism is on everybody's lips at the moment, but in Thailand we see that the Tourism Authority of Thailand, the Sports Authority of Thailand, although under the same ministry, don't really speak with each other about driving sport tourism. It tends to be left to the Tourism Authority rather than sports. So I think it's very difficult when you have many, many, many different players to engage with to get that perfect checklist of things that need to be done.
Again, what about yourself?
I think if anybody wants to put in the effort to do that, I'd encourage it. I think MPA's future success depends not just on us coming together here and talking, but from following through beyond the conference to act collectively to improve and enhance each of our value propositions.
Great.
Yeah, I'd say your idea goes from a wow to an oh moment in that it's difficult to do, but actually for most, I think, event owners, event runners, actually having a resource where we can go to and find who is the right person, and when that government change or the organization change, the new right person comes into place. MPA is a good forum for that, to actually have somewhere where you can go to ask the questions.
All right, before we wrap up, any questions on the floor? No? Okay, so a quick summary then. Know your ground, know your customers, know the region that you operate in, approach them early for approvals, all right? And in terms of funding, don't expect funding to be automatic, all right? Bring a clear value proposition. I think that's important. In terms of integrity, know where the clear line is drawn, all right? Any issues, raise it up to the top, make sure that it's clearly identified and discussed, and don't get drawn into all kinds of quick fixes, I think. In terms of volunteers, all right, there's a big available pool of talent that's out there. Corporations can volunteer their workforces for major events too, and that brings a good value proposition for them. And I think moving forward, maybe I still like the idea of getting people together and putting our expertise together, and as what TECK said, maybe take some action, come up with something that is unique, or even a database of who's who and who's where, so that it's easier for us to make contacts, and we still have a very good pool of people here who are known to each other that we can still turn to for help. All right? And I think on that note, I'd like to thank our panel members today for spending their time with us here, and we wish everybody here a successful event moving forward. Thank you.